From the WKYT studios in Lexington, this is Kentucky Newsmakers with Bill Bryant.
Good morning from WKYT News. Hope you're enjoying your weekend. Later, the U.S. Supreme Court this week took up the same-sex marriage cases from 4 states, including Kentucky, and we'll hear some of the comments by the justices themselves. They'll be making that decision by early summer. But first, on Kentucky Newsmakers, as part of our Campaign 2015 coverage, we're interviewing each of the Republican candidates running in the May 19th partisan primary. We finished those today with Agriculture Commissioner James Comer, who hopes to move into the governor's office in December. First, he needs to win a 4-way primary that also includes Louisville businessman Matt Bevin and Hal Heiner and former Supreme Court Justice as well Will T. Scott. Comer served in the state legislature before being the only Republican elected statewide in 2011. The race for the Republican nomination has been heated, with candidates criticizing each other, and Comer also facing TV ads purchased by an outside group that are not friendly to his campaign. Comer kicked off his campaign in his hometown of Tompkinsville last September. He's been on the road a lot since then. He was just telling us about some of the places he's been and some of his short nights here in recent days. And Commissioner Comer, welcome. Appreciate you coming in.
It's great to be back.
Why did you decide, after one term in the office of State Agriculture Commissioner, that it was now time to move up to the governor's office?
Well, we need to change directions in the state. The state's desperate for leadership. We need conservative leadership with a bold agenda, but a bold agenda from a leader that can actually pass that bold agenda through the General Assembly. I looked at the problems that the state had. I know I can solve those problems. I can work together in a bipartisan way to bring people together, to make Kentucky's business climate more competitive, and to change the culture in Frankfort, which we really need to do.
You think your experience as a legislator would give you a leg up on getting things through the legislature?
Absolutely. I have a record of achievement when it comes to passing legislation. You look at Governor Beshear, he's a nice guy, but he's failed to ever pass any significant legislation. If we want to do things to make Kentucky's economy more competitive, we're going to have to pass legislation. There are issues that Republicans and Democrats will never agree on, but there are issues that we do agree on. We agree we need to create more jobs in this state. We agree we need tax reform in the state. If we're going to pass comprehensive tax reform in Kentucky, it's going to have to pass through the Kentucky General Assembly. So I have a record of achievement passing legislation. I know that there are like-minded Democrats that are conservative. You look at issues like right to work. There's a movement taking place in western Kentucky along the Tennessee border, in Democrat counties where the local fiscal courts and the economic development directors and the chambers are passing local right to work ordinances. I know the Democrats that agree with me on the issues that we need to pass to make Kentucky's economy more competitive. So I'm looking forward to being the next governor and passing a bold agenda for Kentucky. I'm the only Republican that can pass legislation in a Democrat House.
Talk about tax reform as an example, something that you say you'd like to get through. Well, that has been talked about, as you know, for more than 20 years.
Right.
You were in the legislature when it was talked about, but it never gets done. What would you do differently in terms of an approach that you think would be successful?
Well, 2 problems Governor Beshear and Jerry Abramson had when they proposed their tax reform bill. Number one, they filed the bill on the 35th day of a 60-day session, knowing that that bill wasn't going to pass. And second, their overall objective wasn't to make Kentucky's business climate more competitive. Their overall objective was to create more revenue to be able to pay for a bigger government. What I want to propose as governor is comprehensive tax reform that at the end of the day actually lowers taxes and gets rid of the taxes that hold us back as a state, like the inventory tax. We're the only state in the region that taxes inventory. That's a major impediment to trying to recruit industries to come to Kentucky. So we want to pass tax reform that eliminates the taxes that hold us back as a state. I also want to pass tax reform that's focused on growing the middle class in this state. My opponents talk about reducing corporate taxes, and that's great, but we need to focus on growing the middle class. That's what the Comer-McDaniel bold agenda is about, growing the middle class, and I can propose a tax reform plan that focuses on growing the middle class and making our economy more competitive and get enough Democrats to pass it in the 2016 session.
Kentucky has close to a $20 billion biennial budget. Right. If you are cutting and taking away taxes and taking that revenue away from state government, how do you fund the budget?
Well, I'm the perfect person to do that because I have a record of achievement. At the Department of Agriculture, we significantly reduced the number of employees we have, and we did that through privatization. The private sector can do it cheaper than the government. So there are several divisions that I privatized at the Department of Agriculture. It helped us to save significantly on our budget. We've been able to operate with significantly fewer employees. That's what the next governor is going to have to do. If we want to pass tax reform that reduces taxes, then we better elect a governor that has the ability to go in and privatize and reduce the number of state employees, because there are services that the people expect government to provide. But there are a lot of services that the government provides that the private sector can do cheaper. So I want to take my success at the Department of Agriculture and put it to work across the board for all of state government to be able to reduce wasteful government spending to where we can reduce taxes for Kentuckians.
Commissioner, give us an example of what might be privatized.
Well, you look at accounting, you look at information technology, you look at legal services. There are many services that the government provides that the private sector can do cheaper. You know, the many things in healthcare can be privatized. Many of the offices that we have in Frankfurt, we could contract with private companies to do cheaper. The list is endless. There are so many services that could be privatized, and I'm confident that we can reduce government spending by 15%. We can reduce the size of government by 10 to 15%.
Dining services at state
Absolutely.
parks, is that an area?
Exactly. You look at, in education, dining services. UK, Western Kentucky University, many of the universities now have privatized their dining services. They're doing it cheaper now. State parks, that's the poster child for what could be privatized. The golf courses in the state. Alabama's teachers' retirement system owns their golf courses, the Robert Trent Jones Trail. That's owned by the Alabama Teachers Retirement System. Their golf courses make money because they're privatized. In Kentucky, our golf courses lose money. Ours are just as nice. The State Park Golf Course Trail in Kentucky, for the most part, is just as nice or nicer than Alabama's. But the difference is we lose a fortune because we have the state government running those golf courses. Alabama has a private sector. They contract with a private firm that does nothing but manage golf courses. That's what we have to have in state government in Frankfurt.
So you seem to be saying that you feel that state government simply carries too many employees.
Exactly. Yes.
And with that, the associated costs in addition to salaries, do you take that over to the retirement?
Right. Exactly. You can put that over to retirement. That's a perfect place to start drawing money out through savings and putting in the teachers' retirement system and the state employees' retirement.
Would you make some requirements on private employers in terms of how they would treat these employees that would be subcontracted to state government? For instance, that they would get a retirement through those private companies?
Not through the state, no. But I think it's...
But would you, as governor, require somebody that you hired to meet those standards?
Well, what we want to make sure is that people are getting paid a living wage and that people have access to private health care. That's very important to me. That's something that I've focused on in my campaign, is making sure that anytime we offer tax incentives or we try to do business with a private company, that they pay a living wage to their employees and they provide private health care to their employees. Because the problem that we have in this state with respect to Medicaid is 25% of the states on Medicaid. That's not sustainable. A normal percentage of Medicaid recipients for a normal state is 8 to 10%. In Kentucky, we have 25%. So the Comer-McDaniel Plan for a Healthier Kentucky focuses on getting people off Medicaid and into private health care. So that's something that would be important for me.
All of the Republican candidates have been critical of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. As you know, the two-term governor of this state, who was elected and re-elected, considers the state exchange, Connect, to be one of his crowning achievements. He also did the Medicaid expansion that you're referencing. Ohio's Republican governor did a Medicaid expansion as well. You think the governor was wrong to do that?
Well, I think it's been convenient for the governor because he doesn't have to pay the tab. He ordered a big bill but doesn't have to pay the tab. So it was one of those buy now, pay later type situations. The bill for this Medicaid expansion will come due in the second year of the first biennium of hopefully my administration. So when you look at the cost, it's going to cost a lot of money to the taxpayers of the state at a time when we have to apply more money to teachers' retirement system. We have to apply more money to the state employees' retirement system. We have to apply more money to infrastructure in this state. So there are a lot of needs that the citizens of Kentucky have. And when you look at the cost to the taxpayers of this Medicaid expansion, I think that's a bad deal. And I certainly disagree with his assumption that it's going to generate revenue and create jobs. The problem with the free health care bill is somebody has to pay for it. And the working middle class taxpayers of Kentucky are the ones that are going to get hung with the bill. And I'm going to do everything I can in the first year of that first biennium to get people off Medicaid and into private health care.
What is your stance? Because there's been a lot of tough rhetoric about how quickly this can be done, as you say, transitioning people to private health care. And some of the candidates say, shut off Connect on day one. Right. And then some candidates seem to have moved around a little bit on that. How much room do you give yourself, if you were to be elected governor, to get in there and figure out where things are before you start taking people off the rolls?
Well, what I've said is every option will be on the table. We're going to have to go in there and look and see exactly how many people are on Medicaid, first of all. We have 1 year in office, the first year in office, before the bill comes due for the Medicaid expansion. The federal government subsidized 100% of the additional Medicaid costs for the first year of the first 3 years. That third year will end after the first year of the biennium, which is, as you know, a 2-year annual budget. So we have 1 year to go in to see how bad the problem is.
And then you assume 10% of the costs after that,
yes,
right?
Yes. So which could be as much as $500 million, which is $500 million. When you're talking about a $10 billion general fund budget, that's a significant portion of a general fund budget that we can't afford in Kentucky. So the first thing we have to do is pass a bold agenda to make Kentucky's business climate more competitive, so we can recruit good paying jobs into this state, industries that pay good wages, that offer health care benefits to their employees. Once you do that, then we focus on getting those people off Medicaid and into private health care. We have 1 year to do that. So the first year in office is going to be very busy.
You presented a higher education plan that you say has tax incentives that would essentially make a college education in this state free.
Well,
right?
not free, more affordable.
Okay.
More affordable. Well, what we've said in the Comer-McDaniel plan for higher education on my website, jamescomer.com, we say that we're going to cap the tuition costs at UK or U of L, or two flagship universities, at $20,000 for a 4-year degree. Anything over $20,000, if the graduate graduates in 4 years or less and finds a job in Kentucky, we'll offer tax incentives for any cost above that $20,000 for the two flagship universities, and at $15,000 for the regional universities like Eastern, where you graduated from, or Western, where I graduated from. This solves two problems. Number one, it makes college more affordable, because these kids are graduating from college with ridiculous amounts of student loan debt. And two, it incentivizes people to stay in Kentucky, because we make a huge investment in education in Kentucky to educate children from kindergarten all the way through graduation at UK or Eastern. And once they graduate, then they look to where they can find the greatest opportunities. Because of our poor business climate in the state, many of our best and brightest end up in another state. So we didn't make a wise investment. We didn't invest in the future of Kentucky. We invested in the future of Ohio or Indiana. We want to keep our best and brightest in Kentucky. So this is a tax credit that will encourage kids to graduate from college quicker, which helps the universities to save money. It's just a great plan, and we're the only gubernatorial ticket on either side that's addressed the problem of college tuition rates.
So essentially capping those
Yes.
costs. Now, at KCTCS, you had an additional plan for that.
That's the one that's free if they go to technical
Gotcha.
school and get a degree in 2 years. We'll provide tax incentives to pay for the entire cost of tuition, and we'll pay a tax credit to the business that hires that recent KCTCS graduate. If we could demonstrate in Kentucky that we had a readily available, skilled, and trained workforce in this state, we could recruit more industries to Kentucky without even touching the tax code or anything else. If you have the available workforce, the businesses will come. So we want to encourage kids to go to technical school and get certificates, because the jobs today that pay the best wages aren't for the law school graduates or the business administration graduates. They're for the kids that graduate with a skill in advanced manufacturing, or a trade, as we used to call it. So this is what we need to do, and the employers in Kentucky are begging for this.
All right, James Comer is our guest. He's the Kentucky Commissioner of Agriculture. He's running for governor in the Republican primary on May 19th. Back with a few more questions for him, and we'll ask about a couple of things in the Ag Department, and Kentucky Newsmakers continues in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Good to have you with us as we continue our discussion with candidate for Governor James Comer, who is the State Agriculture Commissioner. An apology has come to his campaign from Hal Heiner's campaign after revelations that a blogger apparently communicated with some of Heiner's supporters in an attempt to discredit your campaign, Commissioner. Do you accept the apology?
Well, I'm very disappointed in Hal Heiner and Casey Crosby, but we've moved on. We're focused on winning this primary, uniting the Republican Party, and then beating Jack Conway in November. That's what Chris McDaniel and I are focused on, and we're just going to continue to run a campaign about ideas and achievement.
As you know, Heiner says he didn't know about it, had nothing to do with it himself.
Well, we'll just let the people of Kentucky be the judge on that.
Your 2005 vote to increase legislative pensions has been the subject of ads run by the Citizens for Responsible Government, that group friendly to Hal Heiner. You have now said that pensions should be for part-time lawmakers should be optional?
Abolished.
Abolished.
Right. And I've said as governor, we'll push legislation that my running mate has filed many times, Senator Chris McDaniel, to abolish legislative pensions. That will take effect for legislators from the day that bill signed on, but we'll have an opt-out clause in there for any former legislators that want to opt out of a legislative pension. I'll be the first former legislator to opt out of their legislative pension.
And yet there was that vote in 2005 to make it more lucrative. You've now called that a bad vote.
Well, that's something that if I could correct it as Ag Commissioner today, I would. But as Governor, I can correct that. And I'm committed to correcting that, ending legislative pensions. And I've said for the last 4 years, I'll be the first legislator to opt out of their pension.
Republicans all seem to take similar positions on a lot of issues: eliminate Common Core standards in education, enact this right-to-work law, as you mentioned, opposed to an increase in minimum wage, and to gay marriage. I think all of those are things that that you're all the same on, right?
We're the same on it, but there's one candidate that has a record of being successful in passing legislation. And you look, it's been really since Paul Patton, since a governor played a large role in getting a bold agenda passed to the Kentucky General Assembly. I have the connections, I have the knowledge, I have the ability, and I have the record of passing legislation. And if we want to make Kentucky's business climate more competitive, you can't do it by executive order. It has to be done through the legislative process. I can do that.
Were you disappointed the legislature did not deal with the unfunded liabilities in these pension funds and the two of them, the teachers' retirement system as well as the regular state retirement system?
Well, you know, the state keeps kicking the can down the road. That's why we need a governor with a bold agenda that will be honest with the people. I've been very honest in how we're going to have to be able to afford to put money into the legislative pension system, or into the pension systems in the state. We're going to have to reduce government spending significantly, take those savings and apply them to the retirement system. The way we reduce government spending is through privatization. We're also going to have to change the benefits for future employees. That's something that's not very popular, but it's true. We're not proposing changing benefits for the current employees, but for future hires. If that had been done 10 years ago, Bill, we wouldn't have the unfunded liability that we have today. The can keeps getting kicked down the road, and it's not going to stop until we get a governor with the leadership ability to be able to go in and make the changes, and I will do that.
A huge transportation project hangs over the head of Kentucky with the Brent Spence Bridge in northern Kentucky that carries I-75 and I-71 over the Ohio River. 5% of the nation's GDP apparently goes across that, and pieces of concrete are falling off into the river, it's reported. What would your approach be to getting that done? Haven't you made a pledge that there would be no tolls on it?
Right. I want to work with the federal delegation to get the funding for that. Senator McConnell has proposed eliminating prevailing wage on federal building projects, taking the savings from that and applying it to the bridge. I support that. Senator Paul has filed the Repatriation Act, which would encourage companies that moved overseas to come back to Kentucky or come back to America, take the revenue generated from those companies relocating to America and apply it to our nation's infrastructure. I support that. You know, Congressman Massey's the congressman up there. He's endorsed my campaign. He and I are very close, so I have a great working relationship with the federal delegation. We will obviously apply as many state dollars to that project as possible, but I think that it's an interstate project we need to rely more on federal funds to be able to pay for that project instead of having to toll the hardworking people of northern Kentucky.
As the only office holder running on the Republican side, are you placing your record in office, including your support for hemp, on the line as for consideration by voters?
Absolutely. I say we're running a campaign about ideas and achievement. You can go to our website, jamescomer.com, and see our ideas. But with respect to achievement, I'm proud of the 3.5 years of service I've had as Commissioner of Agriculture. We went in there, made a government agency transparent, efficient, and accountable. We focused on growing the agriculture economy in the state. We grew by 20% last year. That's a phenomenal growth rate for an industry that's been around a long time in this state. We focused on recruiting new industries to the state that have created manufacturing jobs and helped create new opportunities for family farmers. I wanted to do the same thing as governor. I want to make state government transparent, efficient, accountable. I want to quit kicking the can down the road on the pension systems. I want to fix the pension system. I want to improve the business climate. I want to keep our best and brightest in Kentucky and inspire the next generation of leaders to emerge and become active in their communities. We can have a better Kentucky, but it starts with new leadership, and I'm here to lend my campaign as being the leader that can fix the problems we have in the state.
Most of the time, the person with the most money wins in these elections. There are candidates who are spending a lot more money than you have to spend in this campaign. Right. Can you win being outspent 2 or 3 to 1?
I can win. If you look at who's raised the most money, I've raised by far the most money. I have raised more money from Kentuckians than Hal Heiner, Matt Bevin, and Will T. Scott combined. I've raised the most money because I have the most support. I don't want governor's races in the future to be just a multimillionaires club and the winner go to whoever can write the biggest check. I want the winner and to be the person that has the most support, that's traveled the state and put together a grassroots organization. Because if you're going to pass tax reform as governor, you have to pre-file that bill in the summer and travel the state and build a consensus and a bipartisan coalition to pass that. That's what I've done as governor. I've traveled the state, I've spread the message, I've put together investors in the campaign, which are individual small donors all across the state in all 120 counties. Now we're going to prove that someone from the middle class that's worked hard, that has good ideas and a record of achievement can win an election despite multimillionaires writing big checks, paying for negative ads that are false and misleading. Our campaign's about ideas and achievement, and I believe at the end of the day, that's going to win.
Do you look forward to leaving the Ag Department after 4 years? I mean, you were eligible for another 4-year term there.
I was. I will miss being Commissioner of Agriculture. My dream has always been to be a leader in the agriculture industry. I love agriculture. I love farm families. That's where my passion is. That's where my career has been spent as a business owner. But I look at Kentucky. I have 3 children. I want what's best for my children's future. Until we change directions in this state and pass a bold agenda to make Kentucky's economy more competitive, they're not going to have the same opportunities in this state that you and I have, Bill. So we need new leadership, and I'm going to provide that leadership.
James Comer, candidate for governor, Republican side, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Back in just a moment, we'll hear from some of the Supreme Court justices who heard the U.S. Supreme Court case this week on same-sex marriage. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. This week, the highest court in the land heard historic arguments over the rights of gay and lesbian couples to marry. And Kentucky's same-sex marriage ban and refusal to recognize gay marriages from other states is part of the case. Now the Supreme Court is weighing whether gay and lesbian unions should be allowed in all 50 states. The arguments offered the first public indication of where the justices stand in the dispute over whether states can continue defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman, or whether the Constitution gives gay and lesbian couples the right to marry.
And here we have a whole class of people who are denied the equal right to be able to join in this very extensive government institution that provides protection for families.
Well, you say join in the institution. The argument on the other side is that they're seeking to redefine the institution. Every definition that I looked up prior to about a dozen years ago defined marriage as unity between a man and a woman as husband and wife. Obviously, if you succeed, that core definition will no longer be operable.
This definition has been with us for millennia, and It's very difficult for the court to say, oh, well, we know better.
And you know, the out-of-wedlock birth rate...
But that assumes that same-sex couples could not have the more noble purpose, and that's the whole point. Same-sex couples say, of course we understand the nobility and the sacredness of marriage. And we know we can't procreate, but we want the other attributes of it in order to show that we, too, have a dignity that can be fulfilled.
May I ask? The issue, of course, is not whether there should be same-sex marriage, but who should decide the point.
Yes, and
you're asking us to decide it for this society when no other society until 2001 ever had it.
There are some gay people who will choose not to, just as there's some heterosexual couples who choose not to marry. So we're not taking anybody's liberty away.
All of the incentives, all of the benefits that marriage affords would still be available. So you're not taking away anything from heterosexual couples. They would have the very same incentive to marry, all the benefits that come with marriage that they do now.
And again, the U.S. Supreme Court expected to issue a ruling by late June. And the judge whose ruling struck down Kentucky's ban on gay marriage has died. U.S. District Judge John Habron II died Wednesday at home after battling cancer for several years. He was 66 years old. That is Kentucky Newsmakers. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you bright and early on WKYT this morning, 4:30 to 7 a.m., on mid-morning at 10, and on WKYT News at noon. Have a good week ahead.